delegates at the end of this primary season be the nominee, even if they are short of a majority. Senator Sanders, I'm going to let you go last here because I know your view on this. So instead, I will start with you, Mayor Bloomberg.
Whatever the rules of the Democratic Party are, they should be followed. And if they have a process, which I believe they do,
I'm trying to do
so
this,
that
yes or no, to make
everybody
it
else,
fast.
everybody can.
So you want the convention to work its will?
Yes.
Senator Warren.
But a convention working its will means that people have the delegates that are pledged to them, and they keep those delegates until you come to the convention. All of the people.
All righty. Vice President Biden?
Play by the rules.
Yes or no? Leading person with the delegates, should they be the nominee or not?
No, let the process work its way out.
Mayor Buttigieg?
Not necessarily, not to listen.
Senator Klobuchar?
Let the process work.
Senator Sanders?
Well, the process includes 500 superdelegates on the second ballot. So I think that the will of the people should prevail. Yes.
Thank you, guys.
The most votes should become the nominee.
That last voice, of course, Senator Bernie Sanders, who at this point, according to all the polls, is the front runner with the Nevada caucus on Saturday. Katrina vanden Heuvel, editorial director and publisher of The Nation, explain the brokered convention and what Bernie Sanders was saying and what the other candidates were saying.
Let me step back for a minute, though, if I might, Amy. One reason The Nation is holding a debate this coming Monday, February 24th, Sanders versus Warren, Sanders and Warren, time to choose, is that The Nation has not endorsed a candidate yet, except we've endorsed the deepening of the left lane in our politics, the deepening of issues, bold issues that both Sanders and Warren have pushed, in the belief that in solidarity, and you saw last night at the debate a kind of tacit truce between them when the moderator asked Warren to talk about Bernie Sanders supporters and the alleged abuse online. She said, no, I'm going to talk about Bloomberg. He's the real threat to what we believe. And I think that solidarity is important moving forward to the convention, because if Bernie Sanders comes in and doesn't have enough delegates, he is winning pluralities, but the size of the turnout is going to be critical in these next states to bring him enough delegates to get into that convention with 50 plus. He's going to need to turn to allies. If you don't win on that first ballot, as Bernie Sanders said, he got a little wrong, because I think it's 700 superdelegates, not 500. It will get thrown to the superdelegates who are, you know, they are the establishment of the Democratic Party. In some cases, they're also organizers. Ai-jen Poo of the domestic care workers is a superdelegate, which surprises some. But for the most part, they are the electeds, the establishment, those who really were for Hillary Clinton in 2016. So if you have a contested election, it goes to a second ballot, and the superdelegates throw it not to the one with the most delegates, maybe Bernie Sanders with support from Warren, you could see an outrage and a sense of a rigged convention that would deflate enthusiasm, deflate turnout in the general. And I think that is a real concern for many. And I think that's why the process should play out fairly, and why people should come to our debate on the 24th to hear two candidates, their views. We will have their surrogates, too. Zephyr Teachout, great expert on corruption, who ran for Attorney General recently, Bhaskar Sankara of Jacobin, and on the side of Elizabeth Warren, Maurice Mitchell of the Working Families Party, Brad Lander of the City Council. But I think this is a moment, arguably, where America is really eager for bold leadership, bold progressive ideas. I will say one more thing about Chuck Todd and the moderation. This is something that you have talked a lot about, Amy. The media coverage. The media coverage, it almost seems, especially television panels, cable panels, or these moderated debates, people seem to have a hard time with a framework for understanding progressive politics. There's a rootedness in the status quo and a failure of imagination to imagine a world beyond the status quo. And I think that really hurts our discussion, our politics. Imagine if a moderator asked Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, what are the costs of not doing the Green New Deal or Medicare for All? Or why are there no questions from the moderators often, Amy, about the cost of endless war? But there's always a question about the cost of doing major, bold programs that would improve the lives of
there were no
people.
major questions on foreign policy.
The issue is this. In America today, we have chosen the following system, which is an insane system that most people think is brilliant. And the insane system works like this. You tell people that the good society is achieved by encouraging business people to make, first of all, make as much money as possible in whatever way they can. If you have to pay people, underpay people, pay them insecurely, make them contractors instead of salary, do whatever you need to do, but just make as much money as you can by paying people as little and as insecurely as possible. Second, please try to make money by avoiding taxes and even evading taxes illegally if you have to, as much as possible. Set up trusts, set up shell companies. You in the Netherlands know this because, frankly, one of your major roles in the world is as an exporter of oligarchy. Your tax havens are exporting oligarchy to the world and helping undermine democracy in my country and many countries around the world. And third, we tell these business people, if you need to rig public policy to your benefit, against the public interest, but for your private benefit, so that you don't get regulated in the way you don't like, so you don't have labor laws you don't like, so you don't have antitrust, anti-monopoly scrutiny the way you don't like, do that. So then, what happens? You get a bunch of companies that make way more money than they would have made if they hadn't done the things I just described, number one. Number two, you start to have a bunch of social problems that you wouldn't have had people been paid more, had more taxes been paid, had more regulations been in place. And third, you have a government that is no longer capable of responding to those social problems because it is defunded, defanged, and discredited in the eyes of the public. Okay, so this is a very ripe situation. So now, everything I just said is an analysis that is missing from a lot of these discussions, okay? We start where I ended. So now we start with, well, all these rich people have this money, we all have these social problems, and government is terrible, so at least rich people are doing something. No. You have to tell the whole story I just told. Rich people are the reason we have these problems, and the government is incapable. And then they step on the scene and complain about the situation that their class caused and present themselves as the solution to the situation they have engendered, which is sort of like arsonists showing up at the site of a burning building and claiming to be the most capable firefighters, right? It is sort of like me complaining about the French fries that I continue to order and eat every time they're on a menu. The plutocratic class made America plutocratic. Societies don't actually choose to be run for 100,000 people and to the exclusion of 300 million people of their own, free will. Plutocrats create a kind of ruling class ideology that upholds their power. And I believe that we need to see through this ideology, and I wrote the book to try to wake people up from it.
So, what's on your radar?
Well, how many times have you heard Democrats in the Trump era bemoan the undermining of democracy? Now, sometimes those concerns were truly legitimate, like the way that his hotel in D.C. functions as a pay-to-play scheme for foreigners who want to get on his good side. Sometimes they were less legitimate, like the complete meltdown over Russian-bought buff birding memes on Facebook. But over the past few years, the deeply held concern for our sacred democracy was oft expressed in cable news segment after cable news segment. I myself really once thought that it was only primarily those bad Republicans who were trying to undermine our democracy. Now, there was certainly plenty of bad behavior to be legitimately outraged about. The racial gerrymandering attempts and blatant attempts at suppressing the vote among the young, minorities, and the working class is a tactic I have nothing but absolute contempt for. But boy, has the Democratic Party establishment exposed just how shallow their actual commitment to democracy is in the very early days of this primary. So, first, of course, came Iowa. Think about this. For all their moaning about election integrity and the sanctity of the vote, the DNC and the Iowa Democratic Party dispatched with any notions of fairness, impartiality, or even basic common sense in selecting an election app provider that was so cozy with Pete that his signs were apparently plastered all over their office. When greed and clubbiness conflicted with the appearance and the reality of free and fair elections, we all know what they chose, and without any hesitation. Then, of course, after having loudly declared for years that the person who gets the most votes should be the winner of electoral contests, they all went ahead and let Pete declare himself victorious based on an archaic state delegate equivalent calculation that every major news outlet, by the way, found to be completely incorrect. Apparently, the winner of the popular vote should win unless that candidate happens to be inconvenient for them. Then, of course, came Bloomberg. Folks might be having a few second thoughts about him now, but a whole lot of establishment Democrats, even some who've had the audacity to call themselves progressives, stand ready, willing, and able to sell their soul and their democracy all the way out to grab their own billionaire strongman. They didn't blink at the way his money purchased endorsements, or how owning your own massive media company could be a gigantic conflict of interest, or how his donations quash critical analysis from supposedly progressive think tanks. All their rhetoric about money undermining democracy went right out the window once they had their own billionaire to buy the election and keep their own paychecks flowing. And now, new reporting in Politico indicates Bloomberg is actively working a strategy to win over superdelegates so that he can steal the nomination from Bernie on the second ballot. Just your resident oligarch, pressuring party elites, many of whom have financially benefited from his largesse, into subverting the will of the people. Nothing to see here, folks. And of course, speaking of that incredibly undemocratic maneuver, this week we watched as every Democratic candidate not named Bernie Sanders backed a process that would allow elites to completely overturn the results of all these elections that we're covering, and that many of you are volunteering in and giving money to and certainly voting in. A process that would render all of those contests and the concept of democracy itself a complete joke. Let's just watch them all casually embrace Banana Republic style democracy once again for posterity.
We are less than 2 weeks away from a national primary. And I want to ask all of you this simple question. There's a very good chance none of you are going to have enough delegates to the Democratic National Convention to clinch this nomination. Okay? If that happens, I want all of your opinions on this. Should the person with the most delegates at the end of this primary season be the nominee, even if they are short of a majority? Senator Sanders, I'm going to let you go last here because I know your view on this. So instead, I will start with you, Mayor Bloomberg.
Whatever the rules of the Democratic Party are, they should be followed. And if they have a process, which I believe they do,
I'm trying to do
so
this,
that
yes or no,
everybody
to make it
else,
fast.
everybody can.
So you want the convention to work its will?
Yes.
Senator Warren.
But a convention working its will means that people have the delegates that are pledged to them, and they keep those delegates until you come to the convention. All of the people.
All righty. Vice President Biden?
Play by the rules.
Yes or no? Leading person with the delegates, should they be the nominee or not?
No, let the process work its way out.
Mayor Buttigieg?
Not necessarily, not to listen.
Senator Klobuchar?
Let the process work.
Senator Sanders?
Well, the process includes 500 superdelegates on the second ballot. So I think that the will of the people should prevail. Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Most votes should become the nominee.
5 no's and a yes.
Person who has the most votes should be the nominee. Seems pretty simple to me, guys. Now, the most charitable interpretation of this hasty abandonment of democracy is that Trump has so freaked people out that they're willing to completely dispense with all their principles in order just to get him out of office. Now, for some Democratic voters who've bought into certain electability myths and believe that they must back the most right-wing person possible in order to win, I think that may well be the case. That's why Bloomberg, a completely cynical choice with many odious policy preferences that go right along with his own odious personal behavior, has held appeal. But for party elites, it is something else entirely. The truth is, when I was right there with them talking about the scourge of Republican voter suppression tactics, they didn't really care about democracy or the will of the people being heard. They cared about power. And if the shoe had been on the other foot, if Democrats were the ones who would have benefited from having the young or the vulnerable disenfranchised, they'd be pushing voter IDs and closing polling places just as hard as they're pushing for superdelegates now. Never forget that as soon as Bernie Sanders started winning diverse working class and immigrant communities in satellite caucuses in Iowa, the DNC, in concert with Pete, jumped right in there to cry foul and to try to diminish the impact of those voters. Behavior that would have elicited howls of rage and hours of coverage if that had been done by Republicans. Their commitment to maintaining their own grift and hold on power is absolute, but you do not need to buy it. Part of populism is actually believing in and putting your faith in the people of this country, not in gerrymandering or voter suppression or superdelegates or oligarchs. All their scare tactics about how listening to the will of the people will lead to devastation and 4 more years of Donald Trump are really just that. Scare tactics. They're all ultimately designed for you to be bullied into handing power back to them so that they can save the poor, dumb voters from themselves. Well, We see through their ploy, and if they try to play these games, there will be hell to pay. Sagar, part of why this does make me so angry is because I bought it. When I was at MSNBC and we're covering voter ID, we're covering voter suppression, things that I still care deeply about, I really bought into the idea that it was, the Democrats were on the right side of this and the Republicans were on the wrong side, when really it was all just political convenience, and that has been thoroughly exposed at this point.
Turns out that they're both on the same side, and that's on keeping their grift going. Right? That's actually what the entire game is about, and that's what this superdelegates thing is so crazy. And you rightfully point out that the only person who was on that stage who was consistent was actually Bernie, because, look, I've been critical of all this stuff on the popular vote and the Electoral College, but the rest of them went out there, and I'm going to talk about this, went out there forever being like, oh, the popular vote, whoever wins the most wins is supposed to, the most votes is the one who should win the election. And now they don't believe in that because they're willing to use, super delegates and the convention and all these arcane processes just so they can be the nominee, because they care more about that than they do actually advancing some of their own, what they say are their own goals for everybody else. And that's it. It's a naked power grab for everybody to see. Just be honest about it. In a way, I respect Bloomberg for just coming in and trying to buy the election, while the rest of them have been out there talking about, to higher ideals like Pete Buttigieg and all these others. No. You just want power. Just say it.
Yep.
At least that's more honest.
Yep, absolutely right. I mean, we see Elizabeth Warren, her vaunted principles, and I know you're going to cover that in your radar, but how quickly those folded the moment it was inconvenient for her. And she's, now, after having decried the influence of super PACs, suddenly she's decided that maybe now that she's cash trapped, she should take that super PAC money. Surprise, surprise. And Democrats have long been so hypocritical on money in politics. It's part of why people have no trust in them, why they have no moral high ground when they try to prosecute any sort of anti-corruption message against Trump, because they've been crying about money in politics for so long, and yet what do?
Take it.
They do the same thing as the Republicans. They take whatever cash they can get from wherever they can get it in whatever denominations, no matter how odious the interest, no matter how much it undermines the principles they claim to care about. They take it because ultimately getting themselves reelected is more important than any of the values that they claim to stand for.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's just a complete revolving door.
All right, Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.
Well, the Democratic candidates gave away the game last night in a pivotal final moments of the debate when Chuck Todd asked every single one of them if the candidate with the most amount of delegates going into the Democratic convention should be the person who walks away with the Democratic nomination. Let's take a listen to those answers.
We are less than 2 weeks away from a national primary. And I want to ask all of you this simple question. There's a very good chance none of you are going to have enough delegates to the Democratic National Convention to clinch this nomination. Okay? If that happens, I want all of your opinions on this. Should the person with the most delegates at the end of this primary season be the nominee, even if they are short of a majority? Senator Sanders, I'm going to let you go last here because I know your view on this. So instead, I will start with you, Mayor Bloomberg.
Whatever the rules of the Democratic Party are, they should be followed. And if they have a process, which I believe they do,
I'm trying to do
so
this
that
yes or no to make it fast.
everybody can.
So you want the convention to work its will?
Yes.
Senator Warren.
But a convention working its will means that people have the delegates that are pledged to them, and they keep those delegates until you come to the convention. All of the people.
All righty. Vice President Biden?
Play by the rules.
Yes or no? Leading person with the delegates, should they be the nominee or not?
No, let the process work its way out.
Mayor Buttigieg?
Not necessarily, not to listen.
Senator Klobuchar?
Let the process work.
Senator Sanders?
Well, the process includes 500 superdelegates on the second ballot. So I think that the will of the people should prevail. Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Most votes should become the nominee.
5 no's and a yes.
There you have it, everybody. The only candidate who says that the candidate with the most delegates should walk out with the nomination is Bernie Sanders. Granted, he is the person who is most likely to have that scenario, but what you just witnessed was an open door to one of the most possible craven political hatchet jobs in American history. Bloomberg and Biden say they trust the process. Warren indicated right there she's going all the way to the convention. She won't release any of her delegates before the first ballot. And Pete Buttigieg, of course, just gave away the whole game, saying not necessarily should the eventual nominee be the one with the plurality of the delegates. As I write this monologue, Nate Silver's 538 has the odds of a no-majority outcome in the primary almost exactly tied with the odds that Bernie Sanders wins the nomination outright. With the number of delegates, no individual candidate has an incentive to drop out. Mike Bloomberg has oceans of money. Despite his disastrous performance last night, which we will get into, he can paper over almost anything with billions of dollars in ads and at least a second or a third place finish in the states throughout the South that are delegate rich. Warren said it right there herself. She will carry her delegates all the way to the convention, ensuring that she is going to have to say in the eventual Democratic nominee. Pete already said he really gave the game away. He appears to rightfully think that just because he can't get any voters of color to support him, that the undying love he has amongst Democratic elites means he should be the nominee. And Biden, of course, he could stay in, try and flex his muscles amongst old friends in the convention hall, and hell, maybe even Amy Klobuchar can delude herself into thinking she has a chance. This is all a prisoner's dilemma. None of them have any incentive to drop out while the other is in the race, and they risk letting somebody else get the ticket out of the convention. But that simultaneously makes it even more likely that there's a broker convention in the first place. A reminder, too, of the rules in this convention. The process that Bloomberg and Biden were so keen to remind everybody of, well, that process says that on the first ballot, delegates must vote as the states they represent demand them to do so, as laid out by the election process. But on the second ballot, the 764 delegates, superdelegates, will be released from their commitment. This is when the deal-making, consensus-making, second choice, potential Hail Marys, and more all come right into question. Lee Fang of The Intercept has already reported that at least 8 superdelegates work as lobbyists for the healthcare industry, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, JP Morgan, and Chase. People here have already cautioned me against playing up such a fantastical scenario. But the truth is that last night put us on the road to one of the most possible brazen attempts yet in the history of American politics. It certainly has no parallel in modern American history, and it very much could destroy the Democratic Party. It could split the American electorate and more for years and years to come. And that's the thing, Crystal. I mean, I saw that moment, and I was shocked, honestly. I expected it from Bloomberg.
It's a good question,
that was his
by
game.
the way.
Great question from Chuck Todd. Not usually a guy who praises Chuck Todd, but good for him. Bloomberg, I expected it from. Biden, I expected it from, even Pete. But Warren saying that we're going to, nope, those delegates, those are her delegates. She's going to, that really gives away the game that each of them is ruthlessly in this thing to the end. And as I lay out, that is ultimately what makes these broker conventions more likely, because Bernie right now is sitting around last couple states, what do you got, like 27, 28% of the vote. He needs to start getting in the 35, 40 range in order to ensure he's going to get that plurality. Now, look, they all talk a big game. It costs a lot of money to go all the way to the convention and to compete in a lot of these states. So realistically, who's going to be around? Probably Bloomberg, probably Warren, and probably Pete. And that could be enough to make it so that Bernie does not win the outright amount of delegates. What I'm really curious, I want to see how this debate affects Bloomberg's numbers, because if he starts to drop, Bernie's going to win this thing. He's going to win the nomination.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that last night made it much more likely that Bernie will get an outright majority to avoid this nightmare scenario, which if they do try to take it from him using undemocratic superdelegates, party elites, healthcare lobbyists, etc. I mean, you will destroy the Democratic Party. Like I've said this many times, and I'm going to keep saying it. If you do that, you will destroy the Democratic Party. But it was stunning to see them all stand there and basically say, we don't care about the will of the people.
Is
we trust the superdelegates more than the will of the people. And that is astonishing. I was on CNN this morning. It's always interesting to hear the talking points coming from there. I was on with Bakari Sellers. He tried to make this point that it was Bernie Sanders who set the rules, who fought for these rules at the first. So it's hypocritical of him to criticize them. Well, of course, what Bernie Sanders fought for was for it to be the will of the people that actually results in who the nominee is. And the compromise was, okay, on the second ballot, the superdelegates delegates can have their vote. That was not at all what Bernie Sanders, he does not want the superdelegates involved at all, but that's another talking point you're going to hear consistently made now between now and the convention.
I think that, and again, you know, one of the cable news talking points we hear all the time is, well, if you combine the vote of Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren, then that would have beat Senator.
Yeah.
And it's
true,
like,
though.
yeah, but that's like also not how people vote.
It's not how elections work. It's not how people vote.
Yeah, that's not how people vote. That's not how elections work generally. But I mean, you could see it. I could see it right at the convention, especially if here's the thing. What if Biden wins South Carolina? That's a lot more, you know, energy that he's injected in, especially throughout the South. He may not win. You get, 18% of the vote, 17% of the vote. If you start having 3 candidates, Bloomberg, Biden, and Bernie, all hit above the 15% threshold, this thing is going to be brokered.
Part of what it will really come down to is how handily Bernie is able to win in California and Texas.
That's exactly.
That will be a big determinant of whether he comes away with just a plurality or an actual majority. But yeah, I mean, you can see them all laying the groundwork. That, I think you're so right to point out that cable news talking point of, well, if we add all these people together, they outweigh.
You hear it.
So it really is the will of the people. You're going to hear that. You're going to hear, and we've been talking about this for months now, you're going to hear people making the case, look, Republicans should have done the patriotic thing and stepped up against Donald Trump. And now that we have a similar reckoning with history, we're going to do the right thing and ultimately subvert the will of the people. Like, it just exposes their hypocrisy. They've all been running around here for 4 years talking about the popular vote and how important it is to respect the majoritarian view of the people. And now, when it suits their interests, when that's no longer convenient, they're going to give Pete the most delegates out of Iowa, and they're going to use the superdelegates to determine.
Which is that only one of them appeared consistent on that stage, because I've heard every single one of them talk about how we should abolish the Electoral College. So not whenever it's not convenient for you, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.
James Carville made the argument over the weekend that Senator Sanders isn't a Democrat, he's an ideologue, and we've got to get practical. If he is the candidate, he is not going to be able to help win over the Senate. And unless you have the Senate, if you've just got the White House, you ain't going to get nothing done.
Stephanie, does practical mean that the 89 or so million people who are uninsured or underinsured in this country continue to suffer? Does being practical mean that we don't take steps in this country to deal with climate chaos and bring world leaders to bear? Does being practical mean that we continue to prop up a legal system that is unjust in every stretch of the imagination, that bears its weight down on black men and black women, and then by extension, if you are Hispanic or indigenous or poor? Does being practical mean that we don't say to the American people that you deserve better than what you are getting? That's not the kind of practicality we want. Does practical mean that you hold fundraisers and wine caves with Swarovski crystals with billionaires who want to control this system? Does practical mean we continue to go with the status quo while 500,000 people sleep on the streets at night? That's not practicality. So with all due respect to Mr. Carville, what the American people in this country need, they need somebody that is unabashed and that has the courage and the conviction to stand up for them and to call out the rigging of this system. And that candidate is Senator Bernie Sanders.
But steps and a revolution are two different things. In order to get to a revolution, you've got to take steps. And what James Carville is saying is you've got to get to a practical place to make those changes.
Stephanie, the elites in 1930 said the same thing about FDR. And he said, I welcome your hatred. These are the same people that if the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was still alive, when he stood up before he was gunned down and he said to this country, he said the evils of this country, militarism, materialism, poverty, and racism. Those are those same people. So now if President FDR had listened to those people, or if the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King had listened to those people, we would not progress as a nation. So every generation, we got the naysayers, baby. But what the folks of this country need, they need somebody that's going to stand up for them. Senator Sanders is known as the Amendment King. He knows how to get things done. But what people need is to be able to call upon somebody that's not going to capitulate.
Senator Sanders supporters, what is their number one goal? Is it to start this revolution, or is it to defeat Donald Trump? And I ask because there's often a lot of talk around, will those supporters get behind another candidate if it's not Senator Sanders?
Stephanie, why can't we have both? You know, that same argument was made in 2016.
And a lot of those people didn't vote for
However, though,
Clinton.
Stephanie, more of Senator Sanders' supporters supported Secretary Hillary Clinton than her supporters supported then Senator Barack Obama. So let's set the record straight. People do want to defeat President Donald Trump, but they also want to know that they're going to have a fighter in the White House that's going to take it all the way, that's going to go ham on this system that has oppressed them. And so I reject, and so do the American people, the whole notion that you cannot say to a system that it must change and also push a dream and a vision that is bigger than what we have right now. Who wants somebody that's saying to the workaday people of this nation, I'm going to run for office, but you only going to get more of the same? That doesn't work. We're going to win this stuff.
All right. Well, you're certainly in it to win it. Great to see you.
You too, Steph.
Howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So tonight we're going to talk about Bernie, Trump, and Russians. Dun dun dun. Everybody be scared. So the debate right now is, would the Russians really do this? Of course they would. Of course they would. Would they try to interfere in our elections? Of course they would. They would try to influence them. Every country does. And we try to do it to other countries. Of course. Would they really support Bernie? Probably. I mean, that makes sense. Why? For the same reason they supported Trump. The effect from their point of view isn't going to be any different. Not really. Trump's a little bit better for them, but not by much. The reality is, intelligence agencies, they attempt to influence other countries' leadership. That's what they do. They try to advance their nation's foreign policy. That's their job. Having somebody of similar interests in the leadership of another country, that's beneficial to them. Let's do it this way. Why were the Russians in Afghanistan? Leadership questions. 78, I think, there was a coup, brought communists to power. They wanted to back them. Why were we in Panama? Leadership questions. Why were we in Iraq? Leadership questions. What's the issue with North Korea? Leadership questions. If we will go to war over it, we will certainly devote some covert resources. The idea that it's not happening is just saying, I do not understand the international stage. Okay? Of course it's happening. Why would they support Bernie? Why would the Russians support Bernie? The Republicans right now have two answers to this. One is that he's a socialist. Okay. First, he's actually not. None of his policies that he's stated are socialist. But whatever, even let's just say he is, it's not the Soviet Union anymore, it's Russia, and Russia isn't socialist. That doesn't even make sense. The other is that he would be easier for Trump to beat. You're thinking like an American. One of the smartest things I've ever heard about organized crime was a guy who spent a lot of time studying them. And he said the difference between the Italian mafia, Italian organized crime, and Russian organized crime could be summed up by the fact that Italian organized crime sat around and played poker, and the Russians sat around and played chess. The Russians don't gamble. They come up with multiple avenues to get what they want. They would support both sides. So what do they want? That's the question. We keep trying to force our motives onto them. What do they actually want? Do they want to degrade our democracy? No, they don't care. They want to influence our stance in foreign affairs. They want to have somebody that is beneficial to them when it relates to foreign affairs. They do not care what happens domestically. Bernie is the peace candidate, right? He's the guy speaking out against the military-industrial complex. He's the guy saying he wants to reduce our footprint overseas. He's the guy saying he wants to reduce the frequency with which we force project. Yeah, of course. I mean, all that's good for the Russians. It's also good for the American people. Doesn't have to be either or. Why did they support Trump? Because on the international stage, he's incompetent. He can be led around by the nose, which is beneficial to them. That's it. There's no great mystery here. This happens in every election. It's nothing shocking, really. The real question at the end of the day is whether or not the candidates themselves have the integrity to not play ball with them, to not be influenced by that support, to not allow their policies to be changed by that support, to not, well, I'd sit there and listen. That's the real question. It deals with the integrity of the candidates involved. U.S. counterintelligence, it doesn't matter how many resources you grant them, they're not going to be able to stop other nations from trying to influence the election. They're not going to be able to do that. The best they can do is keep tabs on the candidates themselves and make sure that they're not being influenced directly, because then that is a national security threat. Now, they've done a pretty good job of this over the years. They probably won't do very well this election because, the Senate stopped measures to help them, and then their leadership was just gutted. So they're probably going to do really bad at it this time around. But I would suggest not dismissing the idea that the Russians support Bernie. He's the peace candidate. The same reason you support him, if you do, is the reason they do. I would suggest that there are a couple other Democratic candidates who, if they had a chance, they'd also be getting support from Russia. And there probably are a couple others that are getting support. It hasn't been identified yet, because I can think of a couple more candidates that would be getting passive support. Now, this doesn't mean that they're working with them. It doesn't mean that they're meeting them in hotels. It doesn't mean that they're promising them anything. It just means that the Russians would like them in a position of authority because their foreign policy isn't combative. That's kind of a no-brainer. It really boils down to, well, like Richard Nixon said, is your president a crook? Anyway, it's just a thought. Y'all have a good night.
This is a day of national consecration. And I am certain that on this day, my fellow Americans expect that on my induction into the presidency, I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our people impels. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. We face our common difficulties. They concern, thank God, only material things. The withered leaves of industrial enterprise lie on every side. Farmers find no market for their produce, and the savings of many years in thousands of families are gone. More important, a host of unemployed citizens face the grim problem of existence, and an equally great number toil with little return. Only a foolish optimist can deny the dark realities of the moment. And yet we are stricken by no plague of locusts. Compared with the perils which our forefathers conquered, we have still much to be thankful for. Nature still offers her bounty, and human efforts have multiplied it. Plenty is at our doorstep. Practices of the unscrupulous money changers stand indicted in the court of public opinion, rejected by the hearts and minds of men. Yes, the money changers have fled from their high seats in the temple of our civilization. We may now restore that temple to the ancient truth. This nation is asking for action, and action now. There must be a strict supervision of all banking and credit and investment. There must be an end to speculation with other people's money. And there must be provision for an adequate but sound currency. These, my friends, are the lines of attack I shall presently urge upon a new Congress in special session detailed measures for their fulfillment, and I shall seek the immediate assistance of the 48 states. I am prepared, under my constitutional duty, to recommend the measures that a stricken nation in the midst of a stricken world may require. These measures, or such other measures as the Congress may build out of its experience and wisdom, I shall seek within my constitutional authority to bring to speedy adoption. But in the event that the Congress shall fail to take one of these two courses, in the event that the national emergency is still critical, I shall not evade the clear course of duty that will then confront me. I shall ask Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis: broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency as great as the power that would be given to me if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe. For the trust reposed in me, I will return the courage and the devotion that befit the time. I can do no less. We face the arduous days that lie before us in the warm courage of national unity, with the clear consciousness of seeking old and precious moral values, with the clean satisfaction that comes from the stern performance of duty by old and young alike. We aim at the assurance of a rounded, a permanent national life. We do not distrust the future of essential democracy. The people of the United States have not failed. In their need, they have registered a mandate that they want direct, vigorous action. They have asked for discipline and direction under leadership. They have made me the present instrument of their wishes. In the spirit of the gift, I take it. In this dedication of a nation, we humbly ask the blessing of God. May He protect each and every one of us. May He guide me in the days to come.
I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell.
This speech did not get very much attention. When a new president is coming to power, as John Kennedy was, the spotlight was not on Dwight Eisenhower.
We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions.
There was a feeling at the time that this must have been written by some speechwriter who just sneaked into the speech.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
3 months ago, we got contacted by a family up in Minnesota saying that we have documents from Malcolm Moose. He was responsible in part for drafting the military-industrial complex speech.
These new papers give us written evidence that this was not just some caprice of Eisenhower's or something by some speechwriter.
You see the evolution of his speech from May 1959 to 1961.
And he wanted to give this speech for a long time, 2 years.
Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea.
There was one person in Dwight Eisenhower's life whom he really confided almost everything to, and that was his brother Milton.
There's one particular document where the speechwriters had already drafted their version of the speech, only to see Milton come along and totally revamp what had already been written.
When Milton Eisenhower was taking notes and writing things on the drafts of these speeches, the speechwriters knew that it wasn't Milton talking, it was Ike.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
He would see magazines with advertisements for some new warplane or some bomb, and he got so angry he'd take the magazine and throw it into the fireplace of the Oval Office because he felt that defense spending should not be something that would be encouraged by companies who are seeking commercial gain.
We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
There is an interesting document. It shows that the farewell speech will be made to Congress. But yet, President Eisenhower decided, no, he was going to address the people.
Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
One test of how well a president speaks is how long the speech lives. Here we are 50 years later, we're still talking about this speech.
Now, on Friday noon, I am to become a private citizen. I am proud to do so. I look forward to it. Thank you, and good night.
In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask of us here the same high standards of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. And every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day
be able to sing with new meaning, my country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when it happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Because you guys are doing exactly what has to be done in this country. You are organizing at the grassroots level. You are standing up and fighting back against Trump's racism and sexism and homophobia and religious bigotry. You are fighting for a government that represents all of us and not just the 1%. Thank you very much for what you're doing. The crisis that we are facing today is not complicated. It has everything to do that we have a government that ignores the needs of working people, ignores the needs of minorities, ignores the needs of women, yet works overtime for wealthy campaign contributors and the 1%. And what our job is not radical. It's what the American people want. They want a government which represents all of us, not just the people on top. So thank you for helping to lead that fight. Now, in the midst of a lot of bad news that comes from the White House, I want to give you some good news. And that is, we have come a long way over the last 4 years, and you guys are part of the progress that we have made. Let me give you some examples. 4 years ago, when I ran for president, and some of us were talking about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, we were told we were crazy. It was a radical idea. Remember that? Imagine doubling the federal minimum wage. Well, guess what's happened? 6 states have already voted to raise that minimum wage. And a few weeks ago, the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Education and Labor voted out of committee a bill to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. A few years ago, we were saying, we're living in a competitive global economy, and if this economy is going to be successful for working people, everybody in this country, regardless of income, has the right to get a higher education. People said, oh my God, that's just too radical, can't be done. In the last 4 years, all over this country, cities and states are moving to making public colleges and universities tuition free, and to substantially, and this is what our job is, we are going to substantially, if not completely, end the outrage of millions of Americans dealing with student debt in this country. And 4 years ago, we had you really want to hear a really radical and crazy idea? I mean, this is so radical, I hesitate to bring it forward. Imagine, the establishment went crazy, media went nuts, still is. Imagine the United States joining the rest of the industrialized world and guaranteeing health care to all people as a right, not a privilege. Well, we've come a really long way. That was a radical idea 4 years ago. Poll after poll shows a majority of Americans support that idea as well. All right? 4 years ago, we were talking about the ugliness, vulgarity of the United States having more people in jail than any other country on earth. Disproportionately African American, Latino, and Native American. And we said that maybe instead of investing in jails and incarceration, we should invest in our young people in jobs and education. Well, we are beginning to see, we got a long way to go all over the country. Good people standing up and saying, our goal is not to have more people in jail, it is to have fewer people in jail. And when we talk about criminal justice reform, we have to talk about ending the war on drugs. 4 years ago, it was a radical idea to say maybe we should legalize or decriminalize the possession of marijuana. Well, 4 years have come and gone, and guess what? State after state, including the state of Vermont, D.C., have done just that. 4 years ago, there weren't many voices out there that were talking about a corrupt political system in which billionaires are able to buy elections, and that maybe we should move to overturn Citizens United and move to public funding of elections. 4 years ago, there was not a whole lot of discussion about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality in America, where 3 families today, listen to this, 3 families own more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. And at a time when millions of families, people are working 2 or 3 jobs, 46% of all new income is going to the top 1%. So what we said, and I think more and more people are saying it now, maybe instead of giving tax breaks to billionaires and large private corporations, maybe we should demand that the wealthy and profitable corporations start paying their fair share of taxes. The mantra of our campaign is not me, but us. And the reason for that is not just that it sounds like a good bumper sticker. The reason for that is the simple truth. No president, no matter how well-intentioned or honest he or she may be, can do it alone. So I'm going to tell you what very few people will tell you, is that the power of Wall Street, the power of the fossil fuel industry who lies to us every day about climate change, the power of the insurance companies, of the pharmaceutical companies, of the military-industrial complex, that power is so great that the only way we defeat it is when millions of people, black and white and Latino, Native American, Asian American, gay and straight, immigrant and native born, unless we come together and say to Trump that those days of hatred and divisiveness is over. We're going to bring our country together to fight for an agenda that works for all of us and not just the people on top. Thank you very much.